Welcome to our Urban Legends podcast. I'm Dr. Gloria McDaniel Hall. I've been a teacher, a principal, and assistant superintendent, all within urban schools in Chicago and around the country. Our Urban Legends podcast is a forum for sharing ideas, strategizing together, and supporting each other as we dismantle the deficit narratives sometimes associated with urban education and discuss where and how amazing work is being done.
So hello, everybody, and I am so super excited today because this is episode 40 of my Urban Legends podcast, and I think it might be my last episode. I don't know if I'm going to continue to do it. My first goal was to get to 50, but I think 40 might be it, especially because I am talking to one of my favorite people in the entire universe, Miss Keisha Rembert, who is also a doctoral student at National Louis, a professor at National Louis, has done amazing. We've written chapters together and all kinds of stuff. And she's been a colleague of mine, I think for about 5 or 6 years that I've known you. And so I'm super excited because I know that this conversation that I have with Keisha is going to be number 40. Like, it's going to be that one. And so, Keisha, let's start with you introducing yourself and telling us a bit about your whole journey in education.
Well, first of all, I just want to say you are absolutely one of my favorite people. This morning, my husband was like, "What are you doing today?" I was like, I'm talking to Gloria. And now, by proxy, you have become one of his favorite people because you keep me on the straight and narrow. So thank you so much for the opportunity to just be in conversation. When I started in education, I'm going to start as a student, right? I am a Southside girl, born and raised. My parents spent a lot of money to send us to Catholic school, my brother and I, because they were a little scared of CPS. Our area school didn't have the best reputation, and they were scared that we would be gobbled up in the vastness that is CPS. And so my parents, who were blue-collar workers, spent a great portion of their earnings each month for us to go to St. Bride, which is a Catholic school right on a stone's throw. Like, we could look at the lake from our school. And so that was the foundation of who I am as a student. And that small environment, that closeness that you have with I remember one of our teachers invited us to their house. That closeness became what I longed for as a student and what I then wanted as an educator. So I remember I didn't go to school to be an educator. I went to school because I was like, ain't no money in that. I wanted to be Oprah. I'm a Chicago girl, so I grew up watching Oprah and her putting a microphone in people's face and talking about books and giving out prizes and stuff. And little did I know that all Oprah is a teacher herself. And so I got to, at every junction, be able to share my love of books with students and be able to ask amazing questions and be able to share other favorite things with students. It wasn't until I was in college, though, when I was in a couple of classes, and I just love dialogic conversation and like thinking about things from multiple perspectives. And one of my instructors was like, "Girl, you take over my class every time you come in here. Have you ever thought about just being a teacher?" And I was like, "Oh, no. And then the next semester, I had a different instructor, Dr. Henry Blackwell at Boston College. And my first Black instructor at Boston College. And he just had this strong belief in me. And whenever the conversation got heated, he would give me a look like, "Go on, Keisha, I'm gonna let you loose." And and then he told me, he was like, "You need to be a teacher. You need to," like, he started that seed of, "You need to be a professor. Like, you need to be in the seat that I'm in." And I was like, "Dr. Blackwell, I don't want to, y'all don't make enough money. I want money. I want stacks." And when that pipe dream failed, when my Oprah pipe dream delusion, I started subbing, and I end up loving it. I was in a preschool SPED classroom, and I was an assistant there as a sub. And I was like, oh my goodness, every day is different. Every day is rewarding. Like the small things that a preschooler used their talker to tell me they had to go to the bathroom was like a grounds for celebration. And I had a little student, Julian, who was nonverbal, used assisted technology to move and everything. And I'm getting emotional.
You making me emotional. People don't understand, Keisha, like what
Yeah.
like in the classroom. But
Julian was like my kid. Julian was like his mother entrusted me with him for a great portion of the day. And I took that so seriously. Like I knew that Julian could meet these milestones, even though the world might look at him and say that he couldn't. And I saw Julian's personality, and it just was like, wow. Like, just my little time with him, I saw him blossom. And I'm like, okay, if I could do that, it's like searching for that same high over and over again. I'm like, if I could do that for another student, if I could do that for another student, if I could do that for another student. So I went to Chicago State University, a predominantly Black serving institution, which is itself rooted in teacher education tradition, and went there through an alternative certification program. It was crazy because I took the basic skills. That's what it was called at that time. I was 8 months pregnant, could barely get into the little desk, and I'm taking the basic skills. Then 4 weeks after having my son, I start my master's program at Chicago State. So that was in May. We started taking classes. In September, we were placed in a full-time classroom on our own. So we had taken 2 classes and they were like, go. And I was like, oh my goodness gracious. So I was placed at a school in the south suburbs. Fun story. My daughter this weekend was out partying as a young person, and she sends me a picture. And in the picture is one of my favorite students from my first year teaching. And my daughter says, do you know this person? And I was like, of course I know this person. And she said, when my daughter went into the place that she was at, she said, Renata made a beeline to her, was like, I know that face. I know that face.
She looked exactly like
your mother's whole face. And she said, I want you to tell your mother that she parented me that year. I felt like her child that year. And that meant the world to me, because I don't know about y'all, but that first year, especially being as an alternative cert program, I felt like I was doing it all wrong. I wish I could go back as my now self and go back.
Apologize to those
students. Exactly. Reteach those students, because I was like, Renata thought I was raising her. She was raising me. Renata was like, okay, you need to put your graded papers here. Your not graded papers here. Renata was helping me through this process. And I owe Renata some money because she was my little teaching assistant that year. So that it's like those things that are the heart of education and who I am. Even when I changed and left teaching in a predominantly minority space and moved and started teaching in Naperville, which was where I finished my middle grades teaching career as a ELA and history teacher, I was a little nervous to make that transition between where I was comfortable in a space that looked like me and a community that reflected me, to move to an affluent all-white space where only 3 teachers, I think, in the building were racially minoritized, identified as racially minoritized at the time. That was a scary thing. But you know what? What I learned, kids are kids.
Kids are kids.
Kids are
Kids
kids.
are kids.
And what those kids needed in the south suburbs, those kids in Naperville needed the exact same thing. And so that has been a mantra that I have taken with me. Kids are kids, and their needs, regardless of their economic status, regardless of their location, have very similar needs. And teachers have to be aware of that.
So I've been told that you were social studies teacher of the year for the whole state of Illinois. Okay, when was that? Just tell us a little bit about how that happened and how did social studies become your jam?
So in 2019, I won Illinois History Teacher of the Year. And in that same year, I feel like Deion Sanders, y'all, because it was like two awards. Like, remember the year he won for baseball and football? So I was Illinois Teacher of the Year in 2019, but I was also National Council for Teachers of English's Middle Level Educator of the Year. So a national award for being an outstanding middle grades English teacher and Illinois History Teacher of the Year. So I was like, I got a clean sweep, y'all. And I was so proud of that accomplishment because I never intended to be a history teacher, right? So I knew my undergrad degree is in English. I've always loved to write and read. And so that was my thing. Well, when I moved to Naperville, you taught English. When you moved into a certain grade level, you taught English and you taught a social studies class. And so I had to start teaching social studies. And it's happened to be U.S. history. And I saw the humanities connection of that.
Mhm.
It is everything that I loved about reading and everything that I loved about what it means to be human and good citizens, right? So that's what drew me to social studies. Also, being a Black woman, able to bring my lens into social studies was also really important to me because I felt like that was the missing piece. When I looked back on why I hadn't always enjoyed my social studies classrooms, it was because when I think about all my social studies teachers, they were all white men. And they all presented it from the perspective of older white men. So history never felt like it was mine, other than maybe in February, right? And so that was the only time I ever felt seen in a social studies classroom. And so social studies to me became an opportunity to not only present Black voice, but to present Indigenous voice, to present Latine voice, to present South Asian voice, to incorporate all of these people. We can talk about the civil rights movement in conjunction with what was happening with our southern border at the time, because nothing happens in a vacuum. And so we can bring other people into the conversation. We can talk during the Revolutionary War. We can talk about Black folk. We can talk about Indigenous folk. And so that is what it was, a challenge, and I love a challenge. And so that's really what drew me to social studies, as well as I get to teach my students to be better human beings, to be better citizens.
Yes.
I think what we see now in our country is a byproduct of, and this is going to sting some educators, a byproduct of a poor educational system.
Yes.
We haven't taught young people well enough to really dig into rhetoric things. People wouldn't believe a lot of what they see in the political sphere right now if they had been taught effectively to critically think, to identify rhetoric, to dig a little deeper versus just believe in a soundbite, to what is your claim, where's your evidence, and going deeper in that. And so that's a deficit of the system that a lot of the folks who are now casting votes had to overcome.
And you and I were talking a little bit about what you call the big ugly disaster, the bill that's out there now, and it originally, when I heard him speaking about the plan, and when the first part of the plan was to dismantle the Department of Education, it just sounded horrible. But then he put someone in place to head the dissolution of the whatever, who didn't even know about Brown versus the Board of Education, had no inkling of the history of desegregation of school. Like, it's just really scary. But you've been taking a class recently, and there's some hope, and we need some stories of hope. So the university where the two of us work has been classified, I think, as a minority serving institution. So if you could explain a little bit about what that means. And then you said in your class you were talking about Black serving institutions. I really want to know what that implies, and I want to get involved with that. But tell us a little bit about those two.
Well, then I have no doubt when you say you're about to get involved in it, I know you're about to be all in it. So I'm gonna be a tag along for that. I took a class this term, which was an elective for my doctoral class, because at the university that we both work at, there's a lot of conversation about what it means to be a minority serving institution. And again, it kind of goes back to that rhetoric, right? I'm like, wait a minute, what does that really mean? We use that delineation to take money from the government. And I know that Gina Garcia talks a lot about servingness and that element of serving within that. But what does that mean? So I took a class about minority serving institutions, and I've learned a lot already. And just about that delineation, that a certain percentage of your students have to be minorities, that then you get money from the federal government for them. But they're also, and that's just a matrix, right? But what is missing from that is, what does it mean to serve those students and serve them well? Because quite frankly, and this is what I've read in the literature too, that over the past 10 years, enrollment of racially minoritized students is up 500+%, right? So Latina folks, 300%, Asian Pacific Islanders, 200%, Black folks, 165%, Indigenous folks, 118%. So those are staggering numbers. And at the same time, white enrollment in higher ed institutions has decreased by 28%. So if that is the case, how are universities serving those minority students? And so that's the heart of really a minority serving institution. And in doing that, I have been fascinated since I follow J. Luke Wood, who recently became the president of Sacramento State University. I followed him on LinkedIn for a while, and I have been fascinated with his work with Black students. And he and I think it's Keith Curry out of Compton College were some of the ones to spearhead in the state of California Black serving institutions, which are akin to Hispanic serving institutions and Indigenous serving institutions. And California is the first state to embody, it was passed this year to embody Black serving institutions. So Compton College and Sacramento State are the first two Black serving institutions in our nation. And what that means is that 10% of their enrollment, or 1,500 of their students, have to be Black. This is all state funded. We know that California gives more to the federal government than it receives, so all of that funding will come from the state. And that then within that institution, they have to have a Black student success plan. So there have to be certain matrix that the university hits, as far as graduation, as far as GPA, as far as community support, as far as faculty that embody the racial identities of those students. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. I think that's a beautiful thing. And it's different than predominantly Black serving institutions, which is, I said, I went to Chicago State. It was a predominantly Black serving institution, but predominantly Black serving institutions require federal delineation. And that means they have to have a higher percentage of Black population, and they do not have to have Black students success plan. They don't have to have any supports in place for the students, which I think is a disservice to the institution as well as the students. And we know historically Black colleges and universities have existed for a long time, and those institutions have some historic body to them that these Black serving institutions don't. So I was fascinated to learn about those, and I was also encouraged that this designation exists in this climate, right? In this climate where we are saying that, not we, because we know that we're not saying it. So I'm going to stop saying we, because that's not true. That a small portion, and I will say that a very small portion of people in power are saying that DEI is erroneous concept, right? That doesn't create equality and fairness and justice, that it does the opposite, even though we know that research tells us and personal testimonies tell us that that isn't true. We're not in a post-racial world. We're actually in a pre-justice one. And to be in a pre-justice one means that we should be looking at opportunities and avenues for everyone to thrive. I'm a big lover. I don't know, have you read, Gloria, Heather McGee's book, The Sum of Us?
I started The Sum of Us. That is, when you give me books to read, Keisha, or suggest books to me, like I get on a roll and I just can't stop, and then I can't do my regular work because the books are so good. But The Warmth of Other Suns and The Sum, like those two took me out. Like those, So you wrote a book, and it's an amazing book, and everybody is like calling on you to come and do workshops about, what you have in your book, the Antiracist English Language Arts Classroom. Can you tell us a few of the
I'm being a whitey.
A few of your, it's a vital resource for everybody. And I think some people think that it's just for English language arts. And I really do think, when I read it, I really do think that the idea of what we should act like as we are being culturally responsive in anything that we teach really comes out in your text. Can you tell us a little bit about it? What are some of the most transformative things that people could take away from looking at your text?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. It is a text that stands on the shoulders of James Banks and Gloria Ladson-Billings and Bettina Love and Zaretta Hammond and Yolanda Seeley Ruiz. And I say specifically Yolanda Seeley Ruiz because integral to this text is this idea of self-excavation, which she talks a lot about. And I don't think we can start any anti-racist work without understanding our own story, understanding our own positionality, understanding how we look and think about ourselves. And so I think most important to this work of being an anti-racist teacher, and I appreciate too that it says English teacher, but I think it is applicable across subject areas, is to do some self-excavation. What do we know about ourselves? How self-aware are we? And the text asks some critical questions where did you learn, where did you have your first encounter of self, right? And what were the conversations in your living room like? So I remember sitting on the floor of my grandparents' room and hearing stories of Burr Rabbit and hearing stories of my family in Mississippi as landowners, as sharecroppers, and all of this. And so I grew up entrenched in this legacy of Black excellence and efficacy, right? But I also understand that some people didn't grow up hearing that. They grew up hearing the exact opposite. So we have to, and no matter what we do to overcome that and who we might think that we are, we still need to dive into that. We need to think about what were the lessons that we learned as a young person that have formulated what we believe and value today. Because our root systems are important. If I go out in my garden and there is a weed in there that could strangle my squash or strangle my tomatoes, I can't just cut that weed off and just snip, snip, snip. I have to pull that weed up by its root system. Otherwise, it is going to remain, and it could then affect everything else. And I think that if we're not pulling things up by the root, and when we pull them up by the root, if we're not examining those roots and saying, oh, that really came from my grandfather. Oh, that is like, oh, I learned that colonization was a good thing from my third grade social studies teacher. Or let me look at my phone. How many people that don't look like me are in my phone? What communications do I have? That is so important to who I am as an educator. And that's before I take a basic skills class. That's before I step into a classroom. I've got to do that work. Otherwise, who I bring into the classroom could be potentially harmful to any of my students.
Yes.
So that is important. And also, I understand also in this book, I interviewed a bunch of educators for the book. Over 200 educators were contributors to this book, because I understand that my individual voice is small, but collectively our voice is strong. And I wanted to interview people that had been in education for years and who were just starting out as educators and trying this and trying to find their way within this anti-racist journey. And what I found is the central theme for folks was, how do we center the humanity of folks in the classroom? How do we show students that to be Black isn't a detriment, to be Latina isn't to be in a field, to be Indigenous is to not be erased, that those stories and that those identities are pivotal to the American and global experience, not just American experience, but global experience. And also then to understand that as educators, to be anti-racist is not just about our lesson plan. It is in our conversations with students. It is in our conversation with families. It is in the policy work that we do. And so now as a teacher educator, I am really big on teaching students to engage in policy, because if anything, this last era of our political existence has shown us is that we can't always trust politicians to have our best interests at heart. And so as an educator, I am the expert in that. And so I have to be prepared to speak on that to policymakers and be able to give them stories and examples to help them understand the experience of educators and the experience of students, and to humanize that experience so that they see that. Illinois has done some amazing things with the
Responsive teaching and leading standards that working on.
Yes.
Forgot, and part of the conversation, even at our university, and I'm not saying as a detriment, because I think that a lot of people did what we did initially with those standards. And the dean asked me to lead us through the conversation of the standards, right? And there's 10 of them, I think. And there's sub-standards and they're beautiful. And you worked on them, Keisha. But he told me, okay, at each one of the staff meetings, you get 10 minutes. So standard A, which is that reflective
self-awareness, yes.
Self-awareness. Standard A, I got 10 minutes to talk to a whole staff of professors about how we can be different using this. It was impossible. And then I read the 4 pivots, And he was like, what we're doing out here, Sean Jenwright said, Dr. Sean Jenwright said, what we're doing is we're doing stuff in a transactional way. Okay, check, I did standard A. Check, I did standard B. The standard D with students as co-creators of their learning experiences. How can you do that in 10 minutes? So we went through in our syllabi and we stuck words in, like Zaretta Hammond calls it, like put some seasoning on stuff, and thought that we were done. I'm not done with standard A yet. And I've been reading standard. I'm not done with standard D. I try all of them. I don't go in, because our students are adults, I don't go reach out to their parents and stuff like that. But I think instead of transactional, if we want to be transformative in the way that we do this work, and we have to be, what legacy do you hope to leave as an educator in terms of this? We need to transform what we're doing. And then what advice or would you give to school leaders and teachers now who might listen to this to say, here's where you can start? Because sometimes it feels overwhelming too, because with everything coming from the news and with everything coming from social media, and then you got lesson plans and you got this and then you got that. Where would you have a leader and teachers in a particular school? Where would they start?
Glad you asked that. Can I go back to the standards real quick?
Yes.
One of the things that has been difficult for us as I've led the work in a standard is this idea that, and so Illinois has these culturally responsive teaching standards, and they're for teacher preparation specifically. And it's been hard to as a professor, I have to understand the standard. Then I have to understand how I get my students to embody that standard for their students. So it's like 3 layers deep too. So 10 minutes to go 3 layers deep. So you first have to understand the standard and how it applies to you. Now you have to teach your students how to understand the standard, and then you have to teach your students to apply the standard to their students.
Yeah.
So that's years worth of work, right? That can't be done.
It doesn't end. And the thing is, it doesn't end.
It doesn't end. And the words change, and yet the work remains the same, right?
Yes.
Because even if, let's say, Illinois goes through something and they change the name of those standards, the things that predicated those standards still exist. 52% of our students are still racially minoritized, and the numbers are rising because we have newcomer students, because we're constantly changing. And so I think that becomes essential for us to understand. The language may change, but our work does not. And so what I would say as advice to educators is something that one of the people that I interviewed for the book shared that her administrator did. And it was profound and uncomfortable, but it was also, I think I told you this story because you knew the person. I won't say any names though.
Okay.
But they got up in front of their staff as a white male and started to unpack their own biases in front of their staff. They started to talk about, hey, you know what? When I see a boy in the hall with his pants sagging, this is kind of immediately what I think. And the person who I was interviewing was like, it was so uncomfortable. A pin could have dropped in that room. And yet she said, it gave me the courage to go into my classroom and teach like nothing before. Because if I saw somebody who could do that and be that brave and care enough about our students to unpack all of that in front of us, then I knew that I could go in that classroom and be transformative in just the same way. So unpacking who we are, and not unpacking in private, but unpacking in public, I think is important too, because it shows our courage. And then we have to shift our instruction. So we have to stop having low standards of ourselves and of our students. We have to learn, right? Like one of the things that drew me to education was I could be a perpetual learner. I knew that I could always be learning. So I am always reading and learning because I know that that's what's going to, because I know that that knowledge is what's going to seep into the classroom. And I know that knowledge is always evolving and growing. So many people ask me, well, I just don't understand. Like, I know my culture. I don't know any other cultures. Guess what? We're in the city of Chicago. We're in the city of neighborhoods. Take you a walking tour. Get your butt out there. Go to back of the yards. Get on Dilla's bus and do a tour of Pullman. And go to the Mexican Art Museum. Go to any of the great spaces that we had and just immerse yourself in the culture. And also open your classroom up as this cultural space, and as this safe space where you are not going to, I know that there's this tension between what it means to be political as a teacher, right? Like, classrooms are supposed to be apolitical spaces. And I'm not going in saying in my classroom and saying, you need to vote for this person. This is who I voted for. This is my stance. But as if we're going to teach students how to be critical thinkers and analyze rhetoric, which they should be able to do, we're going to have to present them with some. We can't shield them from it. So how are we in our classrooms creating environments of critical consciousness? How are we creating environments of what I deem in the book, oh my goodness, it's in Spanish, and of course it just escaped me. In English, it is care and trust, cariño y confianza. So what does that mean to create care and trust, not only with your students, but within your community? So educators, what is your level of critical consciousness? How are you raising that? What does critical consciousness like in your classroom? How have you created opportunities of care and trust? Care enough to know your students, care enough to know that humanity needs us to be anti-racist. It just doesn't desire it, it needs it. In order for us to thrive as a global society, we need to be anti-racist. So understanding those things and understanding that school doesn't happen within just the four walls of a building. School affects the community. My husband is a real estate agent, and when one of the first things that people ask him are, how are the schools in that area? Because schools affect property value. They affect what hospitals you have, what park systems you have, and how your property value appreciates. So if we want to really, as educators, be purveyors of culture, we have to go out into the community and ensure that if our school is going to be this beacon of light, that it has to shine even within the community itself.
That is an assignment, Keisha. I appreciate you so much. I love working with you. I wish we were in the same department, but we always find a way to connect.
I was about to say, we do it anyway. Read our chapter on, and actually it flows nicely.
It does.
Because our chapter on critical race theory and education in the book Resist, Divide, and Conquer Strategies really gives you some strategies, and it gives you the history of why race is, the discussion of race and the understanding of race in education is so pivotal.
Yes. Thank you so much, Keisha. I knew the episode that I go out with was going to be, you are now officially an urban legend. I got to get you your t-shirt. Thank you so very much.